Pastor Mike, good afternoon. Welcome to Mannin Line on Manx Radio. Chief Constable Russ Foster is with us through till 1 o'clock today. So if you want to get in touch to the most senior police officer on the Isle of Man, call 66 13 68, text or WhatsApp 166 177, email studio@manxradio.com. The police, the Constabulary, have got a lot on their plate at the moment. So if you want to bring anything, then by all means do get in touch. Faster Mike, good afternoon, Chief Constable.
Faster my Andy, and thank you so much for inviting me on the programme.
No, not at all, not at all. Now, you when you were on just a year or so ago, you were talking a lot about security for the Isle of Man. I remember you mentioned the borders as well. How are the borders at the moment?
They're vulnerable, if I'm honest, to exploitation from organised crime groups. And we have worked across government in terms of proposals to enhance security at the borders going forward.
I remember you were, forgive me, were you quite surprised how vulnerable they were when you got here?
I absolutely was. I was surprised at the absence of automatic number plate recognition at the maritime port. I was surprised there weren't facial recognition at both the airport and maritime port. And also I was surprised in terms of the verification of identification and also the sharing of that information with law enforcement agencies.
Okay, so how much has that moved along since you arrived?
Well, there are some challenges in terms of moving that along, particularly around legislation changes. I have briefed ministers, briefed MHKs in terms of some of the challenges that we've faced around the borders being exploited by organised criminals. And there are a number of proposals, one of which is around the verification and identification on passenger carrying services. So that's not just the steam packet, that's the airside as well. There's also a proposal around those, then sharing those manifests with law enforcement. That's not just the police, that's customs and excise and also immigration. And also proposals around bringing the legislation so we can implement facial recognition at the airport, the maritime port, and also introducing automatic number plate recognition at the maritime port. That way we'll have an idea of who's coming and going, we'll understand the threat, and if we understand the threat we can put mitigation in place.
Okay, so are the people who are getting this together, is that Home Affairs?
It is working with Home Affairs but together with other departments across government as well.
And how long do you think it's going to be, Chief Constable, before you're happy? Because plainly you're not.
I see it as a real vulnerability to people on the island, particularly around us being exploited by organised criminals. That's having an impact in terms of the proliferation of illicit drugs across the island, but equally the harms that come with those illicit drugs. And in particular, we have seen an increase in more serious violence where drugs deaths have been enforced, and it's something I'm certainly not prepared to tolerate. I want to work across government, I want to work across different partnerships, and I want to be engaging with the public so they do understand the threat and risk to the island. However, what I would say is, whilst that is true, in the grand scheme of things, when we compare ourselves with other policing jurisdictions, and certainly the 43 police forces in England and Wales, we are still the safest place to live. And this is basically a metric called the crime severity score, and we are at the very bottom of that compared to other forces. So it is still the safest place to be. So I just want to provide that reassurance out there, but we need to ensure that it remains the safest place in the British Isles, and that is certainly a vision that I hold dear to my heart, focusing on protecting vulnerable people, reducing harm in our local communities, tackling criminality, particularly serious and organised crime, whilst putting the victim at the heart of everything we do.
You've mentioned many times in interviews you've done about organised crime and the threat that we on the Isle of Man face, and as you say, compared to everybody else, we're very small on that register. But obviously that's relative. People on the Isle of Man notice when things go wrong. So just regarding organised crime, how much of a threat is it to the Isle of Man? Does it come mainly from the northwest of England?
It does, but we have seen organised crime groups certainly coming to the island from the West Midlands and also the eastern region, over in Sussex and Norfolk. So the challenge is that the risk of coming over here is low at the moment in terms of getting caught, and the yield is high. So we undertook an undercover operation within the nighttime economy of Douglas, and we found that the price of cocaine was 3 times the price here on the streets of Douglas than it was on the streets of Merseyside. So that's what's encouraging to come to the island. They're getting a greater yield. What I want to do is break their business model. I want to increase the risk, which then reduces their yield. If we do that, we'll change the environment here. We'll make it a more hostile environment for organised criminals to thrive, and hopefully they'll take their pernicious drugs activity elsewhere and not exploit the Isle of Man.
What can the public of the Isle of Man do to help?
I think when governments start doing some consultation around changes in legislation around facial recognition, around enhancing security at the ports, is certainly listen to what I'm saying. Believe me, it is informed through intelligence information, and to be really positive in terms of the consultation, and to get me as the head of law enforcement, the head of the Constabulary, to make the island more secure for people of the Isle of Man and the future of the young people across the Isle of Man.
Just regarding drugs, you talked about gangs coming here and the fact that, as you say, it's a much bigger yield on drugs coming over here. You mentioned borders and our official ports. What about unofficial landings, unofficial vessels coming to the Isle of Man, whether it's jet skis or ribs coming to the Isle of Man?
So, Andy, you will have noted, certainly if you were listening to the presentation of my Chief Constable's report by the Minister for Home Affairs and Justice, Jane Paul Wilson, that the Isle of Man Constabulary have been extremely proactive over the last 19 months in terms of a real focus around abating this drug-related criminality. We have enhanced activity at the ports, both maritime and the airport. We've enhanced activity in terms of what's coming in through the post, and we've also enhanced security of small boats coming in who have been bringing drugs into the island, and we have identified perpetrators. We have conducted investigations, secured evidence against them, and they will be progressed through the criminal justice system. And I have to say, I hold our criminal justice system in high regard. It is far, far superior to that of the United Kingdom. And when it comes to sentencing, surely that should be seen as a deterrent. Just recently, in the last week, we've had an individual who's received a custodial sentence of 21 years. Well, let me tell you this. Back in the United Kingdom, you don't get that for murder. That's got to be seen as a deterrent, and I really welcome those types of sentences.
What's the communication or the cooperation between yourselves and the customs?
Really good, and it's been enhanced. So we're imminently going to be having a transition whereby the ports, police and port security will be coming into the Department of Home Affairs, so it will come under the remit of the Constabulary. We've used that as an opportunity to build greater relationships with Customs and Excise and Income Tax, immigration. We frequently run operations whereby we bring all those departments together, which then enables us to use a whole gambit of different powers across the different agencies. For policing, we need to have reasonable grounds to suspect before we stop, search any vehicle or any person. However, with immigration, customs, excise and police, we can actually stop any vehicle, any vessel, any person.
Okay, let's get to get some messages from the answer phone. Here's one.
Hi Andy, this is a question please for the Chief Constable on the Mannin Line. Does the Chief Constable approve, and if so, does he feel it appropriate that the practice of his armed police officers entering a public outlet, i.e. Costa Coffee and the Isle of Man Sea Terminal, whilst on duty for their coffee break? If this is true, then has he carried out a full risk assessment of this practice? Thank you, Andy. I'd be grateful if you can find time to fit that on your new programme. Take care. Thank you, Roger.
Thank you, Roger.
I think that's a really good challenge, and certainly one that's been pervading social media. And I welcome this opportunity just to give some context around this. So firstly and foremostly, I absolutely do approve of my officers, armed or otherwise, taking Costa, meal breaks, coffees elsewhere. I want them to be visible, accessible and responsive to the public, so I really do welcome that. Just in terms of this issue of armed policing, we've not increased our numbers of armed officers since I've been in post. What we have done is change the deployment model. I did undertake a strategic threat, harm and risk assessment across the whole of the Isle of Man Constabulary, and I identified a number of vulnerabilities, and certainly a number of which I am not prepared to tolerate. So just some context. On average, it was taking 48 minutes to deploy armed officers to an incident which fitted the criteria to have armed officers deployed to it. And just so people are aware, before we do deploy armed officers, we work towards the authorised professional practice, which is mandated from the College of Policing, and there is a strict criteria which is authorised at the highest level in the organisation, i.e. Gold Command, so Chief Inspector and above. And that criteria that needs to be met is the fact that there's intelligence information to suggest that there's an individual who's in possession of or has immediate access to firearms, that is otherwise so dangerous they present a threat, a risk to the officers but also the wider public, for an operational contingency and for the destruction of an animal where we can't secure the services of a vet expeditiously and to prevent the unnecessary suffering of that animal. So that's the strict criteria. Once that authority is met, that is authorised, like I say, at an officer above the rank of Chief Inspector, so we've got that accountability framework. There'll be a tactical commander who will develop an operational plan around that, and then that will be put into action at the operational level by a bronze commander, which is usually a sergeant. Those officers are trained to very high standards, a clear discipline around the deployment of armed officers, and as I say, they are the most accountable, they're the most highly trained, and the threat and risk pervading the organisation is not high, it's low. But low risk does not mean no risk, and as I say, there are examples such as Cumbria, the massacres perpetrated by a chap called Derek Bird. There was the Ralmote incident over in Northumbria, the incident over in Devon whereby an individual shot dead 5 people. These aren't your big city areas of Manchester, of Leeds, of Bradford, of London, of Birmingham. They're leafy suburbs, and we're not immune. So I wanted that operational contingency, so I make no apologies for increasing the visibility, the accessibility and the responsiveness of those armed officers.
Okay, a question that also came in from Lorraine, and this is regarding recruitment of officers, and we'll also tag on the end of this retention of officers. I see you're out and about in England recruiting at the moment.
We absolutely are. So it's common knowledge, it was referenced in the final report by Gary Roberts, leaving the incoming Chief Constable with a burning platform. That platform has continued to burn. We are 24 officers at the last count under our funded strength. However, my organisational development team have been working tirelessly in terms of trying to secure individuals to be recruited to the Isle of Man, both locally but also across the water as well. Some of the issues that have been raised is around the living, the starting pay for police constables. They were starting on circa £28,500 a year, which wasn't comparable to other emergency services or other law enforcement agencies. So working with the Department of Home Affairs, there was an agreement whereby we would uplift the pay to starting point 4 on the police constable salary scale, because we do have reciprocity with the UK, so we're aligned to them in terms of pay and conditions around police officers. As a consequence, that's elevated the pay up to circa 34,690, taking cognizance of the most recent pay increase for police officers, and we have attracted an increased number of potential candidates. We've recently run the selection process, and out of that there were 40 applicants ultimately who got through to the assessment centre stage. We've distilled down 20 applicants. We've got another 2 who have been interviewed, potential transferees, so that's certainly 22 towards that 24 gap that we've got at the moment. So real positive news. Clearly those individuals have got to get through the training, which commences in earnest in January. Hopefully they will be out on patrol together with their tutor constable in readiness for TT.
How easy is it for police officers from across or elsewhere to adapt to the Isle of Man? Everybody on the Isle of Man thinks it's very different from elsewhere. Is it different for transferring police officers?
Well, speaking with 30 years experience over in the UK, perhaps I am quite well informed to be able to give a view in terms of that. So, albeit there's changes or differences, I should say, in legislation over here, they are very, very similar. So we do a conversion course. In terms of the challenges, what we've got here is quite a finite resource, but we do have to cover the whole raft of different disciplines within policing, and I've talked about authorised professional practice earlier. And over in the UK, you will have an individual who are very much focused on a particular discipline, i.e. on policing. We've not got this here. We've got our police officers who need to be multi-hatting. They need to be trained in a number of different disciplines. So there's greater variety, there's greater expectations. And unfortunately, there has been some changes in terms of pension schemes. And where once we were attractive to police officers over in the UK, due to those changes, it's not a one-for-one swap, and there is a deficiency in terms of the pension scheme. So police officers joining us will have to work longer for less, so it's no longer that attractive, to be fair. So there's a real focus around trying to secure recruits here on the island.
And in terms of retirement, when can a police officer retire?
Well, it used to be 30 years service, it then went up to 35, it's now 37 and a half years. And usually it's people retiring around 60 years of age.
Okay. Chief Constable Russ Foster is with us on Mannin Line today. It's 22 minutes past 12. Julian, we'll get to Julian in just a moment.
Step into Office World, the island's largest fully stocked stationery store, where there's over 5,000 items on display to take away. From pens, paper, inks and toners to general stationery, adhesives and batteries. You can get what you need right now from Office World. With all the big brands, including Pilot, Pentel, Sellotape, Duracell, Gorilla, Pucker Pads and more. Office World is conveniently located on Spring Valley Industrial Estate, with easy parking right outside the door. Office World!
There's monkeys and meerkats, penguins galore. You can meet with a panda, owls, lemurs and more.
It's half term and the Currax Wildlife Park is open every day. So book your tickets and experiences online now at curraxwildlifepark.im.
Walk through the Christmas wonderland at Ramsey Garden Centre for a magical range of trees, decorations, unique gifts and much more, including the widest range of indoor and outdoor lights. Christmas at Ramsey Garden Centre, open 7 days a week.
Remember, Douglas Fireworks on the 5th of November. This year's fireworks display in Douglas will be bigger and better than ever. The fun kicks off at 7 p.m. on the promenade with the Best Guy competition. Please ensure all guys are registered by 6:45 p.m. Then at 7:30, the fireworks display will light up the bay for a spectacular show choreographed to music from the movies. Douglas Fireworks, Tuesday, November 5th. Brought to you by Douglas City Council, sponsored by Selton Manx and supported by Manx Radio.
The Mannin Line with Andy Wint.
24 minutes past 12. Chief Constable Russ Foster is on Mannin Line today. If you want to get in touch, text, email, call and WhatsApp. And Julian, hello, you're live with the Chief Constable.
Hi, Andy, and good afternoon, Chief Constable.
Good afternoon, Julian.
Hi. I'd like to ask you your opinion on why there is a need here on the island for new hate crime laws, new acts to intercept the public's communications, and the proposal by Michelle Hayward for safe access zone legislation. And what do you think the implications for people's freedom of speech, freedom of movement and freedom of expression would be implementing these new laws?
Julian, I've got one reply to sum up all of those, to be fair, and that is the fact that me as the Chief Constable can only enforce the legislation imposed by Tynwald, and that's my stock answer, I'm afraid.
Yeah, I noticed the UK Investigatory Powers Act that came in 2016 in the UK. They said that the Chief Constable of the UK was very much instrumental in suggestions for the legislation. Do I assume then that you haven't really been put into this at all?
Sorry, Julian, you were breaking up then.
Just saying that the UK Investigatory Powers Act in the UK, which was one of the new ones in 2016, the Chief Constable was asked his opinion in the formation of the legislation. So you haven't been asked your opinion in any of this?
No, I've not been consulted in terms of the interception of communications legislation here in the Isle of Man, but certainly my predecessor was.
Yeah. Okay. I noticed, by the way, you mentioned before about how the Isle of Man is still safe. I noticed that we're still ranked number 3 in the world, and the two above us are Liechtenstein and Taiwan. And both of those have the strongest immigration rules, regulations in the world, and also have a stringent 5-year work permit rule, and also a merit-based criteria for the people that they bring in. What's your take on the 15,000 new immigrants that are being brought to the island, which is a 20% increase in the population in a very short period of time? Do you think that that might have some bearing on the safety on the island?
Well, clearly, again, that's another political agreement by government in terms of increasing the population size. There is potential that there could be some vulnerabilities for the island, which supports the case in terms of rigorous checks around individuals coming to the island, doing some background intelligence checks, making sure that they haven't got a criminal record. If they have, then that being disclosed to law enforcement. So that does support the argument around the verification of identification and ultimately sharing that with law enforcement so we can manage the potential risk which ordinarily we wouldn't be cited on. So some of the investigations we've undertaken have identified some vulnerabilities within our immigration system which are being exploited by organised crime groups. And I've been working together with Cabinet Office, Department of Enterprise and other government agencies with a view to strengthen our position from an immigration perspective during a task and finish group chaired by the Cabinet Office, if that supports what you're trying to say.
Yeah. The other thing I was kind of interested to know, a lot of people saw the videos of the arrest in Port Erin. Just wondering, I noticed that it seemed that the first choice was to use lethal force. Is there not a case to be using a taser first and then the lethal rifles, if necessary, afterwards? It seemed like it was in the reverse on that case.
Right, you're wrong there in terms of lethal force. Let me be clear, no lethal force was used at all. Armed officers are deployed with both lethal options and less lethal options. I'm not prepared to comment any further in respect of that particular investigation. It's subject to the criminal justice process, and as a consequence, it's sub judice, so we'll stop that there.
Okay, all right, thanks, Julian.
Okay. Thanks very much. Cheers.
Good to hear from you. 713. Jonesy says I think it's good to see armed police in Strand Street, or even saying hello when they walk past. Keep up the good work. It's important that our children see police as the good guys who are approachable and not the enemy. My son, says Jonesy, is a police officer on the beat in Liverpool city centre, and they don't have the same respect from the public. Is that the way you see it, Chief Constable? Does the officers get on well with the Manx public?
I think there's a different relationship here. I think we've still got that bedrock of community policing, and that Peeling principle still exists where the public are the police are the public. I'd also like to say when Jane Paul Wilson presented my first report to Tynwald, there was overwhelming support from all the MHKs around the productivity, the performance of the Isle of Man Constabulary over the last 12 months.
Here's a message in from 382 just saying, regarding all the recognition stuff you were happening, is this lots of software? Is it lots of equipment? My question now is, why can't we now put passport travel ID in immediately? Does it need new equipment and software?
There is challenges in terms of additionality with regards to the facial recognition, but also the ANPR. Clearly, when you have new software, you need software licenses. So we have asked the Department for Home Affairs for additionality, but this is around bringing us into the 21st century in terms of how we actually enforce legislation.
Interesting. We've had quite a bit of comment also about the fact that, and you will have heard this many times, there is a Manx way of doing things, the Manx way, and armed police, some people see as not the Manx way. How do you see that?
Well, I think, and I've seen the criticism of me personally, professionally, but I've had significant experience over in the United Kingdom, having responsibility for counter-terrorism policing for the northeast of the country, not just West Yorkshire. Same's true for Regional Organised Crime Unit. And on my watch, a local MP called Joe Cox was murdered on the streets of Batley and Spen, whereby an extreme right-wing individual shot and then stabbed Joe. Now, Batley and Spen, again, is not your big city of Leeds and Bradford. And I come back to the issue around low risk, meaning low risk. That ordinarily, in the context of West Yorkshire, that area would be low risk, but it happened. And I'm in a position whereby I'm not prepared to tolerate 48 minutes to deploy to an armed incident. And I think if someone was seriously armed or even worse, that I would not be forgiven by the Manx public. And just in terms of a statistic, the indication is that someone with a lethal weapon, whether that be a firearm or a knife, for every minute it takes a police officer, an armed police officer, to deploy, 7 people die. Well, I don't want that on my watch, Andy. I'm not prepared to tolerate that risk, hence why I have realigned those armed officers, which on the 1st of April 2023, when I took over, are exactly the same number as they are now. It's just the method of deployment that I've now adopted.
Okay. Hello,
changed.
Vivian, you're live with the Chief Constable. Hello.
Hello. Thank you very much. Good afternoon, sir. May I pass a comment, please? You're talking about how proud you are of the officers and all the rest of it. Can I ask you to please ask them to be more polite to people? Because my dealings with police, and quite a long time, I just find that sometimes they're very arrogant and ignorant.
Whereabouts would this be, Vivian? Just be a bit more specific.
In the north of the island.
Okay, Chief Constable.
So, Vivian, I've already asked my officers to be polite and tolerant. Any new leader coming into an organisation needs to set the standards. We have standards of professional behaviour which I have presented to all my officers over the last 12 months. I've done road shows around the Constabulary, reasserting the standards of professional behaviour and code of ethics. And if you do endure such behaviour, then we do have a professional standards department. I welcome you to make a complaint to them and we'll investigate it and come back to you. It'll be a proportionate investigation, but if there is any breaches of those standards of professional behaviour, we will deal with them.
I am very pleased to hear your comments and I will take it all on board. Thank you very much indeed.
Good to hear from you. Thanks, Vivian. Here's a message in now, and this one's from Dennis, who talks about the uniform. Right? We've talked about arms and what have you, but this is a fundamental one, and this is the uniform. And Dennis just said, I don't see many police officers in collars and tie anymore. Some of them dress like paramilitaries. Has the uniform gone forever, Chief Constable?
Well, there is a national uniform, and we have seen the removal of white shirts. Ultimately, when I first started, used to be blue shirts, and it's more around the black lycra type shirts, which are more conducive in terms of officers, particularly wearing body armour that they do, with a view to them being able to do their job a lot more comfortably, rather than with shirts and ties on and heavy tunics, which I certainly donned when I first started policing.
Okay, and here's a message in from 467. He just says, good afternoon to the Chief Constable. I think having armed officers is a good thing on our streets because there are many new faces on the Isle of Man, and I see, especially in Douglas, and the island is changing. Gary in Ramsey, this is, who also thinks the police force is second to none. Well, I don't want to give you too much praise, but in terms of dealing with this whole point, and I'm coming back to the point about drugs and criminality and the people on the Isle of Man. You've obviously, in a 30-year career, seen in the UK, seen crimes change, the severity of crimes change. Do you see, and again, I'm just interested to why you're talking about the Isle of Man being very, very safe. Are we under threat? Do you see a trend here that you saw in the UK maybe 20, 30 odd years ago?
When I reflect back in terms of me starting my police career 31 and a half years ago now, it was reminiscent of how the Isle of Man is now. And I've come to the island, I've looked what we've got, I've embraced it, I love it. I think it's a safe place to live, to work, to come on holiday. And as the guardian for the next 3 years, 8 months, I want to ensure that we keep a foot on the head of the snake around organised crime groups, whether they're coming and dealing drugs, whether they're financially exploiting people through complex frauds, wherever I'm in command, just to ensure that we protect the communities of the Isle of Man. That's not management rhetoric. That is what I hold dear and what I believe in. And we have stepped up, intensified our efforts around individuals who are perpetrating international money laundering, while we've intensified efforts around people who are exploiting the immigration system and subjecting people to modern day slavery. And that's why we've intensified our efforts around individuals who are coming and supplying drugs to people across the Isle of Man and developing a lucrative business. I want to break their business model, Andy. I want to disrupt, I want to dismantle, and I want to bring to justice organised criminals. And I think with the prison population being how it is, i.e. burgeoning beyond capacity, so much so, we've had to crane in pods to take account of the increased prison establishment. I think we're doing a good job.
OK, to another subject now. Well, actually a split subject. Bad and dangerous driving on the Isle of Man. What sort of priority is that for the Constabulary?
Well, it's a priority that I'm out to account to deliver on, because bad, dangerous driving does influence the number of people killed and seriously injured. So we do have a joint road safety strategy that we adhere to. We do look at enforcing the 4 key issues around people who are speeding, who are clearly using mobile phones, people who are abusing drugs and drink across the island, and basically the description of driving you've just alluded to. We have a very experienced, robust roads policing team. We do work with other partners in terms of trying to take unroadworthy vehicles off the road, and this is all countering the increase in killed and seriously injured on the roads. We've seen a very slight increase this year compared to last year, and it was articulated by David Ashford, MHK, that we are in single figures around the number of people who actually are killed on the roads. And it's something that's been sustained over the last few years, when at one time the island used to be in double figures. And this is the collective efforts across different government departments whereby we have brought it to single figures. But for me, one death on our roads is one death too many.
The issue with the death of young people who are driving, and obviously you can drive at the age of 16 on the Isle of Man, you can get into a fairly racy car. Is the message getting through to young people that they're driving a dangerous weapon?
Well, I'm not sure about the message getting through to them, but I think you're quite right, and the statistics would indicate that males under the age of 25 are responsible for a large proportion of those accidents which result in someone being killed or seriously injured. So I do think there's an opportunity around better education. There's been mention around graduated driving licences. There's also potential around controls, which I know insurance companies do insist on, certainly over in the United Kingdom, whereby basically they're on a curfew to drive. They don't drive beyond 10 p.m. And I know in terms of people certainly on our plates not going over 50 mile an hour. So there is some mitigation in place, but I'm sure there's more to do around educating younger drivers across the island.
What would you say to parents then who've got a son or a daughter now who's 15 years of age and will be getting their licence, possibly passing their test and getting a vehicle? What would your advice be to parents? Because obviously a young death shatters a whole circle in a family and friends.
Absolutely. And, we do experience that on the island. Well, it's around making sure that they abide by the highway code, that they do have regard for their own personal safety, but also that of other road users, particularly pedestrians, but also cyclists, people on horseback who are more vulnerable. So they need to have regard for their own personal safety, but they need to drive within the spirit of the highway codes. They need to stick to the speed limits, and even on roads where there are no speed limits, they need to be very, very careful. That mountain road is certainly a hot spot in terms of the number of people killed and seriously injured. There are no speed limits. There's some twists and turns, certainly for experienced drivers, which are really challenging, let alone those who are more inexperienced. Be careful, that's the key message.
Talking of which, congratulations, says Dave, Chief Constable. We've had no fatalities to visitors on the island over the last 3 years of the TT. What do you attribute this success to?
Well, one of the key things is around the one way on the mountain road. That's been a significant contributory factor. But also the intensification of police officers across the Isle of Man, a real focus around roads policing, some key messages. And again, we had the Know Your Limits campaign. We've had a new media officer that's joined us in the Isle of Man, Joanne Corrie, and she's going to be certainly looking at revamping that campaign going forward. And I do want it to be more hard-hitting. We've seen some really good campaigns historically, basically case studies with the permission of those who have been bereaved and lost loved ones, but they've certainly reaffirmed the message around knowing people's limits.
Okay, and am I right in saying it's often the police officer who is the first person to break bad news to the family if there is a fatality?
Well, it is, and it's a task that I've undertaken many times, and it's never, ever easy. In fact, it's the hardest thing to do. It's more difficult than actually dealing with the aftermath of a collision.
How do you approach that? I mean, do you remember the first time
I
you had to do it?
absolutely do. You approach it with empathy, with being sensitive, but you've got to be brutally honest as well.
Chief Constable Russ Foster's with us on Mannin Line today. We're on till 1. And after Mannin Line today, we're back in the archive, back in 1974, to hear Bill Crisp from Manx Radio take a trip on the Douglas Lifeboat Station, talking to coxswain Bob Corran. That's after Mannin Line today with the RNLI in 1974.
Hello, this is Doug Farragher. In conjunction with Manx Radio, I'd like to invite you to join us and learn something about our native Gaelic tongue, the language of man.
The Finodery Distillery are proud to bring you Refuge Manx Rum, our new fundraising spirit for the RNLI. Aged for a year within the Tower of Refuge, our Manx-made rum is a delicious celebration of 200 years of the RNLI, formed right here on the Isle of Man by Sir William Hillary. Capturing notes of sea salt, caramel, vanilla and bourbon, it's the perfect tot for raising a toast to all those who save lives at sea. Order Refuge Manx Rum today from finodery.com.
Is your first aid kit up to date and is it compliant? Here at St John Ambulance, we can help with our range of first aid kits for both home and workplace, starting at only £15. For an item as small as a plaster to life-saving equipment such as a defibrillator, St John Ambulance hold many items in stock. Just call 674 387 to discuss your needs or email info@sja.org.im. St John Ambulance, here to help.
Dear Santa, this Christmas I would like more customers and more sales, please. I have been very good.
There are more reliable ways to make sure your business gets what it needs this winter. At Manx Radio, we'll create tailor-made advertising solutions to get you the results you want over the festive season and into the new year. Call our friendly sales team now on 682620 and give your business a really happy Christmas and New Year with the nation's station, Manx Radio.
Can I have a new bike too?
No, buy your own.
Oh.
There's been so much happening in Manx politics lately, and with the vote of confidence in the Chief Minister taking place in the Keys tomorrow, we have two interviews from October Tynwald on agenda this week. One from the Chief Minister, which explains his position on health and what he proposes to do about it. We also hear from Joni Farragher on why she resigned at the same time as the former Health Minister. Better late than never on agenda at 5:30 this evening on Manx Radio with me, Phil Gaughan. Will the Chief Minister survive tomorrow's vote? Who would you replace him with? Lots to consider.
The Mannin Line with Andy Wint.
It's 1:45. Chief Constable Russ Foster's on till 1 today. I always remember the words of my driving examiner, says this WhatsApper on 535, when I passed my driving test in 1977. Crikey, what was it, a Morris Marina? Always remember, a motor vehicle is a lethal weapon, says L. And what's the Chief Constable, is it the Chief Constable's responsibility regarding bicycles being ridden on pavements along this? Is this a constabulary thing, or is it local bylaws?
Do you know, I'm not sure, Andy, to be fair. But what I would say is that if they're causing a danger, then, report it to us.
Okay, and again, just a quick one regarding armed officers again. Can the Chief Constable explain the assessed threat to the recent government conference at the Comis that warranted the deployment of armed officers? Was that PR for the government, or was it needed?
it was needed, but I'm not prepared to go into the detail of what informed that threat. That's an operational contingency.
Okay, I worked alongside West Yorkshire officers, the road unit in Leeds for 18 years, and I worked regularly with two officers, AD and Andy. I'm sure your guest knows them. We moved on to the island 10 years ago and never looked back at what was happening in Leeds. I would never want on the Isle of Man, says Tomo. The police did a great job, and I like to see the armed response here as well. I think it should be carried out, and I think ID cards should be on the Isle of Man. If you're not doing out wrong, what's the problem, says Tomo. Just coming back to this, again, this armed stuff, it's part of having armed officers to show the criminal community, the organised criminals, that the Isle of Man Constabulary means business?
I mean, I can see why you would say that, but no, the deployment of those armed officers is purely on that requirement to respond within an appropriate time. And just reflecting, when I mentioned around the incident that happened in Devon, I think the officers arrived within 8 minutes, and there was criticism from members of the public that they didn't get there quick enough. This is purely around an armed contingency. And again, I reiterate, 48 minutes is not a risk that I'm prepared to tolerate. I think, like I said earlier, if someone was injured or even worse, i.e. killed, then I think we would be criticised by the Manx public. I think we would not be forgiven.
Okay, going back to drugs coming into the Isle of Man, is it not possible to search all cars and vehicles before they board the steam packet vessels? And how about having a drugs dog working along the decks of the boat while they are crossing? Do you have any liaison with Lancashire Constabulary for Heysham and Merseyside for Liverpool?
We do, and much wider than that. We have built a fantastic relationship with the North West Regional Organised Crime Unit. So we do work in tandem with them, but also the National Crime Agency as well, and we do joint operations. And they're absolutely right. There is no reason why vehicles, certainly from a policing perspective, if there's grounds to be able to search, so reasonable grounds to suspect they've got stolen or prohibited articles on their vehicle or on their person, then there would be grounds to search them. But whilst I can try and influence other law enforcement agencies, I can't mandate it. And it would be really beneficial for the island if we could search individuals, not necessarily every individual, but certainly based on an intelligence basis coming to the island. So unfortunately we'll have to wait till they get across, and we'll stop and we'll search them then where grounds exist.
Okay, there's a WhatsApper, 839. Can't a copper have a cup of coffee? Good luck to them. I, for one, am happy to see them going about their business in whatever form for this. Interesting that some people are bothered seeing armed officers and other people just see it as part of the job. I suppose it's all down to exactly your own feelings regarding this. Also, are they considering not allowing new drivers to carry passengers, especially of a similar age? And do you think an R-plate driver on the Isle of Man should have limits regarding this? Also, should they have a limit on the power of the cars they can drive? Many are driving cars that aren't road legal because of the way that they they alter exhaust system, says John. Is that politicians or is it you, Chief Constable?
No, this is around policy, isn't it? This is around legislation, so that definitely sits with Tynwald. And I reiterate again, I can only enforce the legislation imposed by Tynwald.
How often do you meet the Minister for Home Affairs?
At least once a month.
Okay, and is that just a normal running through where everything's happening?
No, not necessarily. So I say at least once a month, and then every quarter, together with other political members. So Rob Mercer, MLC, and also John Wannenberg, MHK. They hold me to account for performance. So clearly, I've got operational independence, how I manage, how I lead the Isle of Man Constabulary, but I am held to account for my performance across those policing priorities, but also in respect of how I spend the budget within the constabulary. And quite rightly so, I should be held to account, it should be open, it should be transparent. And in terms of my relationship with the Minister, she is extremely supportive, but extremely challenging in equal measure. And I absolutely welcome the support. And equally, I welcome the challenge. We are a public organisation, we should be held to account for performance. and for how we spend our finances.
Okay. A message in from Kath, and this says, the Chief Constable's mentioned the word terrorism a few times today. Could you ask him, is there a terrorist threat to the Isle of Man?
We'd be naive to think if there wasn't such a threat, but what I would say is that the threat to the island is a low threat, which again, I reiterate, does not mean no threat. So it's one that we do regularly speak with counter-terrorism policing in the northwest, that we share intelligence information just to ensure that we can embrace basically the UK government's contest strategy. So that's the counter-terrorism strategy, they call it contest, around the prevention, the protection, the pursuant, but also the prevent elements of counter-terrorism policing, and also the pursue element as well. We're part of the common travel area. I think the threat is more via us to the UK than anyone coming and committing an act of terrorism here on the Isle of Man. But we have used terrorism provisions within the island. It is legislation that's there, but again, reiterate, the threat is low. This is around protecting the island, people who live, people who work, people who visit the island.
Okay. This is Dave now, just says, could you ask the Chief Constable, is it standard practice to have officers on the beat in Douglas Town Centre Friday and Saturday nights? There have been fights and disturbances on the streets over the last couple of years. Is a visible presence a must? Does that help?
Of course it does. Visible police officers present within areas where there's potential hotspots for violence, and we do have a patrol strategy around the Douglas Town Centre, particularly during the nighttime economy, Friday, Saturday and your Sundays. So they're there throughout the week, but clearly it's intensified during the nighttime economy.
Okay. The Isle of Man is unique in many ways because it's got lots and lots of different types of policing. We've been talking about roads policing and visible policing and drugs, obviously, but international crime and money crime on the Isle of Man. Where does the Constabulary fit in with that?
That's a real interesting question, isn't it?
Well, you've got a minute.
Right, okay. So we are an international financial centre, and we have a number of investigations ongoing, particularly around Southeast Asian communities who have brought business to the island and have, behind that business, defrauded significant numbers of victims of hundreds of millions of pounds. There's 4 investigations ongoing which are rather complex, so it is a real challenge for us. Again, we are being exploited, but equally we have intensified our efforts. We have introduced the proactive international money laundering investigation team, and the clues in the title, they have been extremely proactive. Hence why you've seen examples which have been alluded to in the media around the United Nations Office of Drugs and Crime, whereby the Isle of Man features 26 times. I've read the report. The reason we feature 26 times is because we've been proactive in terms of tackling that element of criminality.
Okay. Thanks for being with us today. It's good to talk to you, and hopefully we'll do it in the new year, so I'll be the first to wish you a very Merry Christmas.
Thank you very much.
Chief Constable, thanks for being with us today. Remember, this coming week, Alex Allenson, Treasury Minister's live on Thursday.
WINT. 60 years serving you as the nation's station. This is Manx Radio.
The RNLI is celebrating its 200th anniversary, a birth in which Sir William Hillary, of course, had such a part. 50 years ago, Manx Radio presenter Bill Crisp decided to find out more about the Douglas station.
Recently, I took the opportunity of visiting the Douglas Lifeboat House and was able to go out on a practice run. This is the Douglas Lifeboat Station when in a few moments from now the lifeboat is about to be launched. Only this is not an emergency, but a perfectly routine practice run. The